Among history's most remarkable figures, two women stand whose strength and legacy still echo across centuries: Louise of Great Britain and Caroline Matilda of Great Britain. Each navigated dynastic marriages, cultural barriers, and royal courts with grace and complexity in a world dominated by alliances and expectations. Let us begin with the first, Louise of Great Britain. Louise of Great Britain was born on the 18th of December in the year 1724 at Leicester House in Westminster, London. What awaited this princess born into the grandeur of the British crown? Would her journey across the sea bring her lasting love or quiet sorrow? What hidden strength allowed Louise to win hearts in a foreign court, while carrying the weight of a crown not her own? Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Louise was the youngest surviving daughter of King George II and Caroline of Ansbach. Born into a turbulent family setting marked by political rivalry and personal strain, she arrived at a time when her father was estranged from her grandfather, King George I. This tension shaped the unique environment of Leicester House, where a rival court had formed in opposition to the royal palace. Louise grew up alongside her siblings in this unconventional setting, surrounded by the political figures and intellectuals who gravitated toward her parents. Despite the pressures of royalty, Louise's early years were filled with the vibrant culture and social energy of her household, preparing her, unknowingly, for the challenges of queenship that awaited her in distant Denmark. Louise's early life was shaped not only by her royal birth, but by the deep divisions within her own family. Her father, the Prince of Wales, had a famously strained relationship with King George I. Their conflict reached a breaking point in 1717, when a public quarrel resulted in the prince's banishment from court. This exile created a parallel royal household at Leicester House, where Louise would eventually be born and raised. Unlike the formal grandeur of the main court, Leicester House had an air of independence and political intrigue. It became a gathering place for opposition politicians, philosophers, and critics of the reigning monarch. In this space, Louise's parents, especially her mother, Caroline of Ansbach, cultivated a more modern and intellectual environment. Caroline, known for her intelligence and support of the arts and sciences, helped create a home where debate and cultural conversation thrived. Within this unique setting, Louise grew up alongside her siblings, but she was closest to Princess Mary and Prince William, the younger children who remained with their parents while the elder siblings had been separated earlier. These three formed a tight-knit bond, developing their identities in a world shaped by both privilege and quiet rebellion. Though she was still a child, Louise absorbed the lessons of diplomacy, resilience, and subtlety, qualities that would prove invaluable later in life, especially when navigating a foreign court. Leicester House, both politically charged and domestically affectionate, served as the first school of queenship for this English princess. As the youngest daughter of the Prince and Princess of Wales, Louise was not expected to play a central political role in British affairs. Yet her position still demanded refinement, knowledge, and preparation for future duties abroad. From a young age, Louise was immersed in the routines of court etiquette and personal cultivation. Her mother, Caroline of Ansbach, believed in intellectual development and ensured that all her children, including Louise, received a balanced education in history, literature, languages, and religious instruction. Though the curriculum was rigorous, Louise's learning took place in an unusually dynamic environment. Leicester House was filled with lively discussions, visiting scholars, and politically minded courtiers. offering Louise a wider worldview than most young royals. She became fluent in multiple languages, a skill that would later serve her well in Denmark, and developed a particular fondness for music and literature, both of which would remain lifelong passions. Her mother's early death in 1737 left a void in Louise's life, and she was then raised mostly by her older sister, Princess Caroline. Despite this loss, Louise continued to grow in grace and discipline, admired for her good temper and pleasant manner. Even before her role was determined, Louise displayed the quiet confidence and social ease of someone destined for higher circles. The British court may not have seen her as a political asset just yet, but in quiet halls and royal salons, a queen in training was steadily taking shape. By the early 1740s, Louise's future was no longer a private matter. As the youngest daughter of King George II, she became a valuable piece on the chessboard of European diplomacy. At the time, tensions were rising between Great Britain, France, and Prussia, and the British government sought to secure alliances through strategic royal marriages. Denmark-Norway, a Protestant kingdom with growing influence, was an ideal partner, and its young heir, Crown Prince Frederick, was unmarried. Though the match between Louise and Frederick was arranged by political advisors, both monarchies saw benefit in the union. Britain hoped to counter Prussian power and secure Danish support in future conflicts. Denmark, under King Christian VI, was initially cautious but eventually agreed, with hopes that a British marriage might help secure Sweden's throne for Frederick someday. Diplomacy, not affection, laid the foundation of this royal engagement. Louise had no say in the matter, as was typical for royal women of her time. Yet her charming reputation, graceful demeanor, and Protestant faith made her a suitable choice. When Frederick saw her portrait and heard of her agreeable nature, he accepted the proposal without hesitation. The engagement was swiftly arranged in 1743. For Louise, it marked the beginning of a profound transformation, from a British princess to the future queen of a foreign land. She was just 18 years old, about to leave everything familiar behind, stepping into a role shaped by politics, expectation, and quiet personal courage. Louise's departure from England in the autumn of 1743 was a grand yet solemn affair. At just 18 years old, she left London aboard the royal yacht HMY Phubs, carrying with her trunks of regal garments, royal bedding, a traveling tea set, and farewell tokens from her family. Her journey began with a symbolic stop in Hanover, her father's German possession, where a proxy wedding was held on the 10th of November. Her brother, the Duke of Cumberland, stood in for the groom. From there, Louise continued to the Danish Duchy of Holstein, where she finally met her husband, Crown Prince Frederick, in the town of Altona. Their formal introduction was followed by an exchange of entourages. Louise's English retinue was replaced by a Danish one, headed by Karl Jewel and Christiane Henriette Louise Jewel. The transition was not only logistical but emotional. It marked the true beginning of her transformation from British princess to Danish crown princess. The royal couple traveled together to Copenhagen, entering the city on the 11th of December to widespread public celebration. That same day, their official wedding was held in the chapel of Christiansborg Palace, the heart of Danish royal power. Just a week later, Louise celebrated her 19th birthday as the new crown princess of Denmark. A celebratory cantata was composed in her honor, setting the tone for her warm reception. Although the marriage was arranged, the early days held promise, festivity, and hope. For the Danish people, Louise's grace and dignity had already begun to win hearts. As crown princess, Louise settled into her new life in Copenhagen with a surprising ease that endeared her to both court and commoners. Initially residing at Charlottenborg Palace, a modest Baroque residence overlooking the city's bustling square, she and Crown Prince Frederick cultivated a more relaxed and lively household than the rigid one maintained by his deeply religious parents at Christiansborg Palace. Balls, music, and theater flourished under her influence, bringing warmth to the Danish court. Louise made a deliberate effort to adapt to her new surroundings. Although German was the dominant language at court, she began studying Danish with help from the court priest, Erik Pontoppidan. She also hired tutors for her children to ensure they learned the native tongue, a gesture that made a strong impression on the Danish people. Her natural friendliness, curiosity, and willingness to engage in Danish traditions earned her widespread affection. By 1745, the couple moved into the newly renovated Prince's Mansion, a Rococo-style palace designed specifically for them. It became a cultural hub of royal life, filled with music, literature, and artistic gatherings. Though her husband continued his indulgent lifestyle, Louise maintained her dignity, focusing on her duties and quietly shaping a more accessible, elegant royal image. While Denmark remained foreign in language and custom, Louise's intelligence and social grace allowed her to bridge two worlds, not as a passive consort, but as a young woman creating her own place within a centuries-old monarchy. In the early years of marriage, Louise and Frederick appeared to be a harmonious royal couple. Publicly, they shared a warm and even playful relationship. Portraits of the time and reports from courtiers painted a picture of two young royals bringing life and charm to the Danish court. Louise's popularity was rising rapidly, and her composed, dignified presence offered a gentle contrast to Frederick's spirited and unpredictable energy. Privately, however, their marriage was less ideal. Though Frederick treated Louise with respect and kindness, he was never truly devoted to her. He continued a life of heavy drinking and frequent affairs, most notably with his mistress Else Hansen. Louise, aware of his behavior, chose to remain silent, a decision likely shaped by duty and survival in a foreign court. She maintained an image of grace and patience, never allowing scandal or complaint to cloud her public role. Despite these emotional challenges, Louise fulfilled her responsibilities with discipline and optimism. She supported her husband during court functions, promoted the arts, and ensured that her children were raised with care and education. Her ability to remain calm and kind in the face of disappointment only deepened the admiration she received from the Danish people. Though her heart may have carried quiet sorrow, Louise's composure never faltered, a sign of her maturity, strength, and understanding of what queenship required. Louise's life changed forever on the 6th of August in the year 1746, when her father-in-law, King Christian VI, passed away. At just 21 years old, Louise became Queen of Denmark and Norway alongside her husband, now King Frederick V. With this new role came a dramatic shift in responsibility, visibility, and pressure, but also an opportunity to shape court life on a much grander scale. The royal couple moved from the prince's mansion to the stately halls of Christiansborg Palace. The atmosphere at court, once bound by the strict religious codes of the previous monarch, transformed almost overnight. Frederick's reign began with a lighter tone. Lavish entertainments, operas, and balls returned. But many believed it was Louise's influence that softened the royal image and helped win the affection of the public. On the 4th of September in 1747, Louise and Frederick were officially anointed in a grand ceremony at Frederiksborg Palace. The coronation symbolized not only royal legitimacy, but also a renewal of joy and openness in the monarchy. Louise, though modest in manner, carried herself with dignity and elegance, winning praise from foreign ambassadors and Danish citizens alike. As queen, she continued her efforts to learn Danish, engage with local traditions, and act as a cultural bridge between her homeland and her adopted kingdom. The early years of her queenship were marked by vitality, goodwill, and popularity. In a foreign land, far from the royal court of her birth, Louise stood not as an outsider, but as a beloved and respected sovereign in her own right. With her new role as queen, Louise found herself at the heart of Denmark's most powerful institution, Christiansborg Palace. The imposing residence had long symbolized authority and tradition, but under Louise and Frederick, it became the center of a cultural revival. The heavy atmosphere that once surrounded the court during the previous reign was lifted, replaced by music, theater, and social events that reflected a more open, vibrant monarchy. Louise played a quiet yet vital role in shaping this transformation. Though not politically influential, she became the emotional and social anchor of the court. Her grace, kindness, and sense of decorum won admiration from nobles, foreign dignitaries, and ordinary Danes alike. Balls and concerts resumed, and the palace once again welcomed artists, musicians, and writers. Behind the festivities, it was Louise's consistent poise that set the tone. Her efforts to speak Danish with her children and courtiers were particularly praised. At a time when German remained the dominant language at court, her commitment to embracing the national language was deeply symbolic. It signaled respect for her new homeland and helped endear her even further to the public. The famed Danish writer Ludvig Holberg even expressed his joy at hearing her speak Danish with the royal children, a gesture that spoke volumes about her sincerity. Despite personal challenges within her marriage, Louise made Christiansborg not just a royal residence but a place of renewed warmth and national pride. In the eyes of many, she redefined what it meant to be a queen, not through power, but through presence. One of Queen Louise's most endearing qualities was her genuine effort to connect with the Danish people, not through grand proclamations, but through culture, language, and personal warmth. Unlike many foreign consorts, she embraced her new identity with sincerity. Determined to bridge the gap between her British upbringing and Danish life, she studied the Danish language diligently and ensured that her children did the same. Her decision to speak Danish with them at court was unprecedented and deeply appreciated by the public. Louise also became a great patron of the arts. In 1747, she supported the arrival of the Italian opera company led by Pietro Mingatti, whose performances at Charlottenborg Palace brought a new level of sophistication to Danish court entertainment. Among its members was the famed composer Christoph Willibald Gluck, who even composed an opera to celebrate the birth of her son, Crown Prince Christian. Louise's court became a vibrant stage for music, dance, and theatrical performances, creating a cultural renaissance within the palace walls. She found joy in music herself, playing the clavichord and encouraging her daughters to sing. Her interest in the arts was not merely ceremonial, it was heartfelt and personal. Through language, music, and cultural openness, Louise made herself not just a queen in title, but a queen in spirit. The people saw her as someone who respected their heritage and contributed to its flourishing, earning her a lasting place in the hearts of many. Behind the graceful image Queen Louise maintained at court lay a more painful private reality. Her husband, King Frederick V, despite showing her public kindness, never abandoned his indulgent lifestyle. His drinking habits and extramarital affairs, particularly with his favored mistress Else Hansen, were well known within royal circles. Louise, though deeply aware of these betrayals, chose not to confront or challenge them. Instead, she preserved her dignity through silence, focusing her energy on her duties and her children. Her response to Frederick's infidelity reflected not weakness, but strength. She understood the limitations of her position in a male-dominated court and chose a path of quiet endurance. Her calm composure helped avoid scandal and maintain the stability of the royal household. While some saw her tolerance as submission, others viewed it as an act of personal sacrifice for the greater good. In addition to her husband's behavior, Louise faced difficult decisions regarding her children. In 1751, she strongly opposed the proposed marriage between her 5-year-old daughter, Princess Sophia Magdalena, and the Swedish crown, Prince Gustav. Louise feared the girl would suffer under the influence of Gustav's mother, Louisa Ulrica, a woman known for her anti-Danish sentiments and domineering nature. Louise's opposition was heartfelt, rooted in her own experience with arranged marriage. Though her objections were ultimately dismissed, they revealed the deep maternal concern that guided her actions. Even as queen, Louise remained a mother first, quietly protecting her children within the limits of her role. Though still young herself, Queen Louise took her role as a mother with utmost seriousness. She gave birth to 5 surviving children, each of whom would play a meaningful role in European dynastic history. Among them were Princess Sophia Magdalena, who would become Queen of Sweden, Princess Wilhelmina Caroline, who married into the House of Hesse, and Christian VII, who would inherit the Danish throne. From their earliest years, Louise ensured that her children were not only well cared for, but also well educated and culturally grounded. Her decision to raise them speaking Danish rather than the traditionally favored German marked a subtle but powerful shift in the royal household's identity. By nurturing their connection to Denmark, Louise laid a foundation for future monarchs to be more closely aligned with the people they ruled. Tutors were brought in to teach them both academic and artistic subjects, and the Queen herself played music and guided her daughters in singing. She remained involved in their daily lives despite her increasing royal duties, always attentive and present. Louise's values, dignity, respect, kindness, and cultural awareness were deeply instilled in her children. Though their futures would be shaped by court politics and arranged marriages, Louise's gentle presence and moral grounding would leave a lasting imprint. In many ways, her legacy was passed on not just through royal ceremonies, but through the personalities and principles of the next generation. Her short life was spent planting seeds of grace, language, and loyalty that would bloom long after she was gone. In the final year of her life, Queen Louise's health began to deteriorate as she entered her 6th pregnancy. What should have been a joyful occasion quickly turned tragic. Louise developed complications from a pinched umbilical hernia, a serious and painful condition made more dangerous by the stress of pregnancy and limited medical knowledge of the time. As her symptoms worsened, court physicians attempted emergency surgery in a desperate bid to save both the Queen and her unborn child. Despite their efforts, the operation failed. On the 19th of December in the year 1751, just one day after her 27th birthday, Louise passed away at Christiansborg Palace. The news of her death sent shockwaves through the royal court and the wider public. Denmark had lost not just its queen, but a beloved figure who had come to symbolize grace, kindness, and cultural openness. Public mourning was immediate and heartfelt. Louise had spent only 8 years in Denmark, 5 of them as queen, but her influence had been profound. She had won the affection of nobles and commoners alike, not through political power, but through humility and devotion. Her body lay in state at Christiansborg Chapel before being taken to Roskilde Cathedral, the traditional burial site for Danish royalty. The sorrow was especially deep among those who had seen in her the promise of a gentler, more human monarchy. Many wondered what Denmark might have become had she lived longer. Her quiet advocacy for the arts, her support for multilingual education, and her ability to connect with both elite and ordinary citizens offered a glimpse of a more inclusive royal future. Letters from foreign courts expressed admiration for her character, and poems were written in her memory. Even beyond policy or politics, Louise's strength lay in the way she carried herself, a queen who never raised her voice, but always listened. Her presence softened tensions at court, and her modesty became a quiet form of leadership. In private letters later published by court officials, glimpses of her inner world revealed a woman of thoughtfulness, spiritual depth, and genuine concern for others. To those who had known her, even briefly, she had brought not just royal dignity, but emotional warmth. In her final days, Louise's courage and quiet suffering only strengthened the image of a queen who had given everything to her adopted homeland and asked for nothing in return. Her death was not only a royal loss, it was the silencing of a truly human voice at the heart of power. The death of Queen Louise plunged Denmark into a period of profound mourning. Though only 27 at the time of her passing, she had earned the love and admiration of the Danish people in a way few foreign-born queens ever had. Her grace, humility, and cultural sensitivity had made her a cherished figure, and her early death was mourned not just as a royal tragedy, but as a personal loss by many. Her body lay in state with full honors at Christiansborg Palace Chapel, where courtiers, clergy, and citizens alike paid their final respects. The funeral procession, solemn and deeply emotional, led to Roskilde Cathedral, the historic burial place of Denmark's monarchs. There, her remains were interred in a sarcophagus designed by English sculptor Carl Frederick Stanley. The cathedral, already filled with centuries of royal history, now held the memory of a young queen whose presence had briefly transformed the Danish court. In the years that followed, Louise's legacy continued to grow in public memory. Poets, including the German writer Friedrich Gottlieb Klopstock, composed verses in her honor, expressing deep sorrow over her suffering and admiration for her gentle nature. Compared to her successors, especially the reserved Juliana Maria and the tragic Caroline Matilda, Louise was remembered with special warmth. Her husband, King Frederick V, remarried less than a year later. Yet for many Danes, Louise remained the queen of their hearts. Her early death marked the end of an era of joy, and her absence was felt in both palace and public square. Though her reign lasted only 5 short years, Queen Louise's legacy endured long after her death. She was remembered not for grand reforms or political maneuvering, but for the quiet power of her presence, a queen who won hearts through dignity, kindness, and cultural grace. Her commitment to learning Danish, raising her children with affection and national pride, and promoting the arts gave her a distinct place in Danish history. Louise's popularity became even more pronounced in comparison to those who came after her. Her husband's second wife, Juliana Maria of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, was never embraced by the people in the same way. Her formal demeanor and strict court etiquette clashed with the warmth and accessibility that Louise had embodied. Likewise, Louise's niece and eventual daughter-in-law, Caroline Matilda of Great Britain, met a far more tragic fate. Accused of adultery and exiled from Denmark, Caroline's downfall only deepened the nostalgia for Louise's serene and scandal-free queenship. Artists and poets idealized Louise as a symbol of goodness lost too soon. Her image was memorialized in portraits, poems, and public sentiment. Even far across the Atlantic, a county in Virginia was named after her during her lifetime, a rare honor for a foreign-born princess. Louise's legacy was that of a bridge between Britain and Denmark, between monarchy and the people, between duty and compassion. Though her life was short, her memory remained vivid in Danish hearts, a reminder that a queen's strength could lie not in ruling a nation, but in simply loving it well. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Princess Caroline Matilda of Great Britain was born on the 11th of July in the year 1751, at Leicester House in London, England. What happened to this overlooked princess who suddenly became a queen? How did a quiet childhood in London lead to political storms and scandal in Denmark? And why did the world remember her more for a love affair than for the ideals she tried to uphold? She was the youngest child of Frederick, Prince of Wales, and Princess Augusta of Saxe-Gotha, and never met her father, who died just weeks before her birth. From the start, Caroline Matilda's life was shaped by absence, duty, and expectation. She was born into the Grand House of Hanover, but her place within it was unusually quiet. As the sister of the future King George III, she was a princess with little public role but great dynastic value. Caroline Matilda was raised largely in seclusion, far from court politics. Her mother, Princess Augusta, kept a tight rein on her upbringing, prioritizing morality, modesty, and Protestant faith. With no father figure and limited social exposure, the young princess grew into a reserved and thoughtful girl. She loved books, music, and horseback riding, and showed little interest in courtly glamour. Her future remained uncertain until, at the age of 15, she became the focus of diplomatic arrangements that would alter the course of her life. Without much preparation or choice, Caroline Matilda was chosen to become Queen of Denmark, a role for which she was both wholly unprepared and tragically destined. Caroline Matilda's life began with a profound absence, the death of her father, Frederick, Prince of Wales, just 3 months before her birth. This tragedy cast a long shadow over her childhood. Raised in Leicester House under the strict supervision of her widowed mother, Princess Augusta, Caroline Matilda was protected, but also isolated. Augusta's mourning never lifted fully, and her determination to shelter her children shaped their upbringing in powerful ways. Unlike her elder siblings, who participated more in public life, Caroline Matilda lived in near-private seclusion. The early loss of a father figure meant her emotional world was tightly bound to her mother's influence, and to a household where duty, obedience, and simplicity reigned. Augusta imposed strict moral standards and discouraged frivolity, believing that personal modesty and Protestant virtue were the cornerstones of royal character. Caroline Matilda's childhood routine reflected this somber philosophy. Her days were filled with religious lessons, reading, music practice, and long rides through secluded gardens. Though intelligent and inquisitive, she lacked broader social exposure and was never trained in the complex politics of European courts. Her brother, George III, became king in 1760, but even as the sister of a monarch, Caroline Matilda remained in the background. This sheltered upbringing, meant to protect her, instead left her emotionally unprepared for the world she was about to enter. When she was chosen as a bride for the King of Denmark at age 15, she was thrust into a foreign court, far from everything she had ever known and deeply unready for the storms that awaited. In 1764, when Caroline Matilda was just 13 years old, quiet days at Leicester House were interrupted by a startling diplomatic proposal. Denmark, seeking to solidify its Protestant alliances, approached the British crown with a marriage offer. Their intended groom was King Christian VII, a distant cousin of Caroline Matilda and only 16 himself. Politically, the match made sense. Personally, it was a leap into the unknown. Caroline Matilda was not yet of age, nor had she been groomed for the role of queen consort, yet the offer was accepted with little delay. Her brother, King George III, viewed the proposal as an opportunity to strengthen ties with Denmark and enhance Britain's influence in Northern Europe. For Caroline Matilda, however, the engagement meant the end of her secluded English life and the beginning of an uncertain future in a foreign land. The announcement was met with mixed emotions. Some members of the British court viewed Denmark's king, known even then for odd behavior and volatility, with suspicion. But Princess Augusta, ever loyal to the crown's interests, prepared her daughter dutifully. Lessons in Danish customs began, and a new wardrobe was commissioned. Still, no one could fully prepare Caroline Matilda for the reality that awaited her. On a cold January morning in 1766, at just 15 years old, Caroline Matilda stood before the altar of St. James's Palace to be married by proxy. Her groom, whom she had never met, was over 500 miles away. The journey into royal destiny had begun. In the spring of 1766, Princess Caroline Matilda left the familiar streets of London behind as she set sail for Copenhagen, now officially Queen of Denmark. The voyage across the North Sea was long, cold, and symbolic, a farewell to her childhood and an entry into a foreign court where everything from language to customs would be unfamiliar. The 15-year-old queen was accompanied by a modest British entourage, but upon landing in Denmark, even they would soon return home, leaving her entirely alone. Caroline Matilda's first impressions of her new kingdom were cautious. Copenhagen, with its ornate palaces and stiff court ceremonies, felt colder than the sea she had crossed. The Danish nobility greeted her with polite curiosity, yet there was an unmistakable distance. Unlike the warm familiarity of Leicester House, the Danish court was governed by rigid protocol and a network of whispering courtiers, many of whom were wary of this young foreign queen. She met her new husband, King Christian VII, only days after her arrival. The encounter was unsettling. Though handsome and elegant in appearance, Christian's behavior was erratic and detached. Caroline Matilda noticed at once his lack of warmth and emotional instability, warning signs few around her dared to acknowledge aloud. The official wedding took place in May, surrounded by splendor, music, and fanfare. But behind the public display, a strange silence loomed. Caroline Matilda had stepped into a gilded world that shimmered with tradition and power, but lacked tenderness. She smiled for paintings and waved to crowds, but deep inside, the loneliness was already beginning to take root. A queen in title, she was still a stranger in a palace of mirrors. From the moment their marriage became official, Caroline Matilda and King Christian VII seemed like a mismatched pair bound more by treaty than affection. At only 16, Christian was already showing signs of emotional instability, erratic moods, cruel pranks, and periods of deep withdrawal. He had little interest in his young bride, preferring the company of courtiers who enabled his reckless habits. Caroline Matilda, thrust into this world without guidance, soon realized that her role as queen would be more ceremonial than marital. Their relationship deteriorated quickly. Though they fulfilled their duty by producing a son, the future Frederick VI, their personal connection remained cold. Christian would vanish for days into Copenhagen's taverns and theaters, surrounded by flatterers and entertainers, while Caroline Matilda was left to navigate court life alone. Her efforts to reach her husband emotionally or intellectually were met with indifference or, at times, cruelty. Court rumors began to spread. Christian's behavior grew more unpredictable, and whispers about his mental state could no longer be ignored. Yet Caroline Matilda, young and isolated, was expected to maintain dignity and decorum at all times. Her only solace came from music, reading, and quiet walks, a far cry from the companionship she had once hoped for in marriage. What began as a royal union meant to strengthen empires had become a private prison for a teenage queen. In the echoing halls of Christiansborg Palace, Caroline Matilda's dreams of a loving partnership faded into the same silence that had greeted her upon arrival. But the winds of change were stirring, and with them, a dangerous new chapter in her life. Despite her personal isolation, Caroline Matilda embraced her role as queen with quiet determination. In 1768, she gave birth to her first child, a son, Prince Frederick, securing the royal succession and fulfilling one of her most vital duties. The birth was celebrated throughout Denmark, and for a brief moment it seemed the queen's position at court had been solidified. Yet behind the joyful announcements, her emotional life remained unchanged. Motherhood brought Caroline Matilda both comfort and purpose. She doted on her son, taking a hands-on approach uncommon among queens of her time. Her bond with Frederick would remain one of the deepest of her life. Still, even as she nurtured her child, the young queen continued to face subtle hostility from courtiers who resented her British background and growing independence. In public, Caroline Matilda performed her duties with grace. She attended state events, supported charitable causes, and appeared at royal ceremonies with dignity. Her willingness to learn the Danish language and adopt aspects of local culture won her modest public favor, but at court, she remained an outsider. As King Christian's behavior grew more erratic, Caroline Matilda was increasingly left to represent the crown alone. Her quiet poise became her armor, a way to survive the cold formality of palace life. But while the world saw a dutiful young queen beneath the surface, her heart longed for meaning, connection, and understanding. It was in this vulnerable space that a new figure would soon enter her life, one who would change everything. The arrival of Johann Friedrich Struensee at the Danish court marked a subtle yet decisive turning point in Caroline Matilda's life. A German-born physician and intellectual, Struensee had been appointed as King Christian's personal doctor in 1768, at a time when the monarch's mental instability was becoming impossible to conceal. What began as a medical assignment quickly evolved into something far more significant. Struensee was not just a healer. He was a man of the Enlightenment, rational, articulate, and deeply idealistic. As he gained the king's trust, he also began to exert influence over court policies. But it was his quiet, respectful demeanor and intelligence that caught the attention of the lonely young queen. Unlike the gossiping courtiers or indifferent ministers, Struensee treated Caroline Matilda as a person, not a pawn. Their first conversations were formal, conducted in German, the language they both spoke most fluently. Yet an intellectual bond quickly formed. He listened to her thoughts, encouraged her interests, and understood her frustration with court hypocrisy and stagnation. Slowly, admiration turned into affection. Though their connection was initially discreet, whispers began to circulate. For Caroline Matilda, Struensee represented everything missing from her world: warmth, equality, and hope. In his presence, she felt seen and valued, not just as a queen, but as a woman. The Danish court, already fragile, was unaware that this quiet alliance was about to shake the very foundation of power. A queen, a physician, and a deeply troubled king. The stage was set for revolution and ruin. As the bond between Caroline Matilda and Struensee deepened, their shared ideals began to translate into real political action. Struensee, empowered by his influence over the increasingly passive King Christian, initiated a sweeping series of reforms rooted in Enlightenment philosophy. From freedom of the press to the abolition of torture, from public health improvements to limits on aristocratic privilege, Denmark was suddenly transforming, and fast. Caroline Matilda supported these changes, both privately and publicly. She admired Struensee's courage and clarity of purpose. More than a romantic companion, he had become her intellectual partner, someone who gave shape to the values she had quietly carried through years of isolation. Though her official role remained ceremonial, her presence at Struensee's side gave legitimacy to his vision of a modernized Denmark. For the first time since arriving in Copenhagen, Caroline Matilda found herself involved in decisions that affected real lives. She encouraged reforms in women's education, advocated for improved maternity care, and helped expand access to the arts and sciences. The Queen was no longer a lonely figure behind palace windows. She was now a symbol of progress. Yet their growing power did not go unnoticed. The nobility, especially those whose privileges were being stripped away, grew increasingly resentful. Rumors of the Queen's affair with Struensee fueled a sense of moral outrage among traditionalists, who saw Enlightenment ideals as a threat to their authority. What had begun as an intellectual awakening was rapidly becoming a political storm. Caroline Matilda, once a silent figure of ceremony, now stood at the heart of Denmark's most radical transformation, and the backlash was about to begin. By 1770, the relationship between Caroline Matilda and Struensee had grown from quiet affection into a deeply personal and political partnership. Though their love remained unspoken in public, private letters, subtle glances, and coordinated reforms told a story that courtiers could no longer ignore. Whispers turned into scandal, and scandal into rage. For the conservative nobility, the Queen's intimacy with a commoner, and a foreigner at that, was more than immoral. It was a threat to the entire structure of power. At the heart of the storm was a question of legitimacy. Struensee, though officially just a physician, had effectively become the ruler of Denmark. Royal decrees were issued in his name. He reshaped laws, dismissed ministers, and centralized authority, all while King Christian remained increasingly distant from state matters. Caroline Matilda's visible support of Struensee gave him an aura of royal approval. To many, it seemed as though the Queen and her lover had hijacked the Danish throne. Their enemies seized on the Queen's pregnancy in 1771 as a weapon. Rumors that Struensee, not Christian, was the father of Princess Louise Augusta began to circulate, threatening not just Caroline Matilda's reputation, but the very legitimacy of the royal bloodline. The court turned against her with renewed fury. Beneath the glittering chandeliers of Christiansborg Palace, plans were already taking shape. Allies of the Dowager Queen and outraged nobles plotted in secret, determined to reclaim power and restore tradition. Caroline Matilda, once a distant British princess, now found herself standing at the eye of a political hurricane, and time was quickly running out. In the early hours of January 17, 1772, the fragile world that Caroline Matilda and Struensee had built came crashing down. Under the cloak of darkness, a palace coup was executed with chilling precision. The Dowager Queen Juliana Maria, together with loyal nobles and the royal guard, seized control of Christiansborg Palace. King Christian, confused and pliable, was manipulated into signing arrest orders. By morning, both Caroline Matilda and Struensee were prisoners. The Queen was arrested in her chambers, denied time to dress properly or speak with her children. Struensee was dragged from his quarters and separated from her at once. Their allies were purged from court. The pace of events was brutal, swift, cold, and final. Denmark's era of Enlightenment reform had ended overnight. The charges were sweeping: abuse of power, moral corruption, and treason. But at their heart was one unforgivable accusation, that of an affair between the Queen and Struensee. With the court now dominated by their enemies, the trial was never going to be fair. Caroline Matilda was denied a proper defense and kept in isolation. Her letters were seized, her servants interrogated, and her every move watched. The public, once supportive, was fed a steady stream of scandalous pamphlets and rumors. The image of the young queen was twisted into that of a traitor. In just a few days, Caroline Matilda had fallen from the height of royal influence to a prisoner stripped of her dignity, her titles, and her future. Denmark would never be the same, and neither would she. Following her arrest, Caroline Matilda faced a grim and humiliating investigation. Stripped of royal privilege, she was confined to Kronborg Castle, where interrogators arrived not as servants of the crown, but as agents of her downfall. The pressure was immense: days of isolation, relentless questioning, and veiled threats of harsher punishment if she resisted. The court demanded a confession, not justice. Though Caroline Matilda initially denied wrongdoing, the relentless pressure wore her down. Eventually, she admitted to a close friendship with Struensee, a carefully worded statement that her enemies interpreted as proof of adultery. It was exactly what they needed. Her confession was circulated as scandal, used to justify the complete erasure of her status and position. Struensee, meanwhile, was subjected to torture, and under duress, confessed to the affair as well. His fate was sealed. In April 1772, Struensee was executed, beheaded, then drawn and quartered in a brutal public display. Caroline Matilda, though spared death, faced a different kind of exile, one of permanent separation and silence. She was stripped of her titles, her children taken from her, and placed on a British ship bound for the German town of Celle. There was no farewell, no royal procession, only a quiet departure under military escort. The queen who once dared to hope for love, for purpose, and for progress was now cast aside by the very monarchy she had tried to uplift. Her world had narrowed to a few rooms in a borrowed palace, and memories that could neither be erased nor reclaimed. Caroline Matilda arrived in Celle in May of 1772, a fallen queen, 20 years old, banished from Denmark and separated forever from her children. The town, nestled in the quiet countryside of Hanover, was a far cry from the grandeur of Christiansborg Palace. Yet here, in the modest castle provided by her brother King George III, she began the final chapter of her life. Though surrounded by attendants and afforded a comfortable residence, Caroline Matilda's existence in Celle was marked by deep solitude. She was forbidden to contact her son, Prince Frederick, or receive news from the Danish court. Her days became a routine of reading, walking the palace gardens, and writing private letters that were often censored or intercepted. The lively, curious girl who once embraced Enlightenment ideals now lived as a dignified prisoner in all but name. Yet she maintained grace. Despite heartbreak and humiliation, Caroline Matilda held to her composure. She refused to collapse under the weight of public disgrace, even when her name was used as a warning across Europe's royal courts. Local residents came to admire her quiet strength, and she occasionally hosted small musical gatherings, reminders of the cultured spirit she once brought to Denmark. There were rumors, too, of hope, of possible reconciliation with her brother, even of restoring her to a new role in German politics. But these plans never came to pass. For all her titles and lineage, Caroline Matilda's future had been taken from her. In Celle, she waited not for power, but for peace. In exile at Celle, Caroline Matilda's thoughts often drifted back to Denmark, to the court she had tried to change, the son she was forbidden to see, and the man whose life had been taken for loving her. Though officially silenced, she found her voice again through letters. painfully aware that most of her correspondence would be intercepted or ignored, she wrote anyway to her brother George III, to former allies, and even discreetly to Danish officials. Her words were never bitter, but filled with longing, restrained emotion, and appeals for understanding. She did not seek to reclaim her crown or return to power. What she desired most was contact with her son, Prince Frederick. She begged for news of his health, his education, his happiness. But court policies in Copenhagen ensured that not a single reply reached her hands. As the months passed, the Queen's regrets grew quieter but deeper. She never denied her connection to Struensee, nor did she attempt to rewrite the past. Yet she often wondered whether her decisions had truly served Denmark or merely doomed her loved ones. In private, she questioned the cost of progress, and whether the ideals they had championed had come too early, in a world not yet ready to change. She found solace in music, in reading, and in long walks under the cloudy Hanoverian skies. But Caroline Matilda's heart remained suspended between two worlds, the one she had lost, and the one that might have been. Her letters, filled with emotion and silence, became the last traces of a queen still reaching for what had been taken away. In the winter of 1775, a wave of renewed hope briefly touched Caroline Matilda's quiet life in Celle. Diplomatic whispers suggested that her brother, King George III, was considering efforts to restore her to public life, perhaps even to secure custody of her son or assign her a ceremonial role within the Hanoverian court. For the first time in years, the exiled queen allowed herself to dream of reunion and redemption. But that fragile hope was swiftly shattered. In early May, Caroline Matilda fell ill with what was described as a sudden fever. Within days, her condition worsened. The court physician, despite his efforts, could do little. On the 10th of May in the year 1775, Caroline Matilda died at just 23 years old, alone, far from her homeland, her children, and the people she once served. The news of her death stunned those who had quietly admired her strength. Rumors quickly circulated: had she been poisoned? Was her death natural or convenient for those who still feared her influence? No investigation was made. The official cause was given as scarlet fever, and with that, the matter was closed. She was buried in Celle's Stadkirch, without royal ceremony, far from the courts that had once defined her life. The young queen who had tried to bring enlightenment to Denmark, and had paid the price for love, reform, and independence, was gone. Her final days, like much of her story, were left wrapped in silence and sorrow. Caroline Matilda's story did not end with her quiet burial in Celle. In the centuries that followed, historians, writers, and artists revisited her life with fascination and debate. Was she a tragic heroine, a misunderstood reformer silenced by tradition? Or was she a reckless royal whose personal choices destabilized a fragile monarchy? Her legacy remains suspended between these two poles. To some, she was a woman ahead of her time, one who embraced Enlightenment values, challenged patriarchal norms, and supported reforms that would only gain widespread acceptance decades later. Her bond with Struensee, though scandalous by court standards, has been interpreted by many as a genuine partnership built on shared ideals. In this view, Caroline Matilda stands as a symbol of intellectual courage and emotional honesty in a world that allowed little room for either. To others, however, her downfall is seen as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of overstepping boundaries, especially for a foreign queen in a rigid society. Her affair, whether romantic or political, threatened the legitimacy of royal power and gave her enemies exactly the pretext they needed to reverse progressive change. Yet even her critics cannot deny the deep mark she left on Denmark's history. Her brief reign and exile inspired novels, operas, and films, all trying to capture the quiet defiance of a queen who dared to feel, to think, and to act. In the end, Caroline Matilda is remembered not for her perfection, but for her humanity. Her legacy lies in the questions she left behind about love, power, and the cost of trying to change the world from within a throne room. What do you think about Queen Louise of Great Britain? Was she a gentle unifier, a queen who brought grace, kindness, and quiet strength to the Danish throne, bridging cultures and raising a future king with dignity? Or was she a sidelined consort, overshadowed by court politics, remembered more for her foreignness than her faith and intelligence? And what about Caroline Matilda of Great Britain? Was she a brave reformer, a young queen who dared to embrace love, enlightenment, and change in a kingdom bound by tradition? Or was she a tragic figure, isolated, betrayed, and exiled, her legacy clouded by scandal and sorrow? Were these two British-born queens merely pawns in dynastic chess, or quiet architects of influence in foreign courts? Did their struggles speak of weakness, or of a deeper strength that history rarely honors? Their lives, so different yet similarly shaped by distance and duty, remind us of the cost of being royal and being human. Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales from the past. Stories of courage, choice, and the quiet force behind history. Thank you so much for watching.